Welcome to the All of You podcast, where we believe healthy relationships are created by growing individually and pursuing a healthy relationship with yourself.
So let's take a deep breath. Settle in and grow together. We are officially home from our honeymoon.
Yep.
And settling back into the house, selling off the last wedding decor on OfferUp, and going full steam ahead into the podcast.
Yeah, it feels good.
Doesn't it?
There's parts of the wedding season that I'm starting to miss. At first, I was really excited about moving forward to the next thing. And I couldn't have stayed in that season forever. It was grueling and it was hard, but there was so much good that I am starting to process a little bit of like grief around it being over.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I'm like, I want to go back to it, mostly because there was so much good, but there was so much stress. But I do look back at it with like loving eyes.
Yeah, that's a
Like
good way to
I
put
just
it.
look back so fondly on that season.
It's like how I look at the girls now when I think about like a few years ago, just how cute. And when I look at old videos, I'm like, man, I missed that stage. Like I wish that they were still that little, but I wouldn't actually go back there. I'm so grateful for who they're becoming. And the goal is to raise good kids and have them grow up. Like the goal was to get married and have a podcast and live this life. And so I'm glad we're here, but there's a lot of, you said it well, there's a lot of fondness of the memory of the last few months.
Yeah.
I can't wait to do a video about it. It's taking a little while because there's so much content, but I can't wait to start editing and putting videos out about that season.
Yeah, me too. What we actually wanted to talk about today, which I feel very confident announcing, is the father wound. And I feel confident announcing it because this is an episode I know you're going to share a lot more. And it's always more comfortable for me when I'm not the one throwing my heart out onto the air. So I'll thank you again for being willing to go into this topic. I think we'll just open up and ask, like, what is the father wound?
Well, it's different for every person. So, and I'm mainly speaking about men here because I believe that many women are affected by their fathers and they have wounds as well. But this episode, I would say, is more geared towards men because that's the experience here comes from my father and just me doing so much research on this wound because I had such a gaping wound from my father. I did a lot of research around the father wound, and in that I've discovered that it affects many men, not just men who are wounded because of abandonment, not just men whose fathers left them. It can actually be more harmful if your father was abusive. More harmful isn't really the right way to use any term. It's not a competition of wounds. I think any time you have a wound to any degree, an emotional wound, just like a physical wound, let's say me and you are in a car accident and I have a giant scrape on my leg, but you lose your leg. I could care about you and I could try to tend to you as much as possible, and you're in the hospital and you get surgery and you're going through all this. My wound will get really infected and could cause me to even die if I don't address my own wound. So I think this is what happens with a lot of us is and I'm sorry, I'm rabbit trailing a bit, but I kind of have to backtrack a little bit to explain it even. So if I don't address my own wound, I won't ever heal my own wound. Like every person, no matter what your wounds are, even if they're really small, you still have to address them. And I think most of us, our inclination, if you're anything like me, you're saying, well, my childhood wasn't that bad, because you're looking at people who are worse. So you're looking at the person who lost their leg when you just have stitches. But if you get a open cut that's big enough, you still have to address it, or it will get infected if it's that bad. So like, we have people in our society walking around with cuts, wounds from their father, and they're like looking at somebody like me and they're like, well, at least I had a dad. Or I'm looking at somebody else like, well, at least my dad didn't sexually abuse me, or my dad didn't do this or that. And it's like, that's not helpful. The comparison is no longer helpful when you're talking about healing. When you're talking about healing, you're talking about full self-acceptance. So you're talking about going inward and examining your own wounds and healing them. And the only way to do that is to first acknowledge you were wounded. So the father wound is whatever it is for you. If your dad abandoned you, you probably know you have a father wound. If your dad tried his best and had good intentions, but wasn't real present, didn't really validate you, maybe overly criticized you, the likelihood is that you probably don't know you're wounded. And you may not even want to validate that wound, because that's the human condition. Well, for whatever reason, we don't want to validate our own wounds. But that is what keeps us stuck, is what we're discovering. And I think psychologists have known this for years and years and years, but this is becoming now public knowledge. People like you and I are talking about psychology on the internet. And some psychologists would say, don't do that. Let's not, only the five of us who have studied this should be talking about it. And I would say, how is that helping our society? We have millions of people walking around wounded with mental health issues. Let's get the information out there. It's clearly there. And I learned it from some guy who started teaching a class to men. He has no degree, to my knowledge, of anything about this, not a psychologist, just passionate about healing other men.
You forgot to mention that he healed and is now in a
Yes.
healthy relationship.
I'll
but
probably
yes.
have to cut that out. That was kind of a rant. But when we don't acknowledge our own wound, we tend to not be able to heal. And what the father wound is so big for men. I think when you have, and why is this so much bigger? Because I think it's bigger in our society, because it's so common for the father of the home to not be present. It's so common for a child growing up to desire, daddy, look at my test score, look at my this. And the dad's like, I'm worried about the bills. I'm worried about the food on the table. I'm worried about and should he not be? Like, this isn't a father bashing episode. This is not to say that we have a bunch of fathers out there not trying. Like, they might be trying their best. This is to say, even if your father tried his best and did everything he could, like, let's say you had a dad who was a immigrant, came over here working very hard, had to work for minimum wage or less, 16-hour days to survive, just to put food on the table. Don't bash your dad, but the only way to heal is to face your own wounds. And your wounds are probably that your dad wasn't around a lot. And how did that affect you? What scars do you have? What wounds do you have? Do you hear what I'm saying there?
Yep. So essentially, the father wound is the wound that, and actually, correct me if I'm wrong, women and men can have a father wound, correct?
Absolutely. But I don't know as much about how it affects women. I'll be honest. That's not my area of expertise. You had a good dad, and your dad was there and present with you a lot of the time, and so we don't dig in a ton to how it affects women. So if that's a woman in this episode, like I don't, or somebody listening, I don't, that's not my area of expertise. My area of expertise is how it affects men. So when you're a woman and your dad leaves, or your dad abandons, or isn't present, or is overly critical, or whatever he is, you are misled as to what a man should be, and that hurts you in your picker. Like your picker's broken now, most likely, because you were modeled the wrong thing. When you're which sucks, and that's damaging, and you need to heal that and fix your picker, or else you're going to choose emotionally damaged men. Like that's kind of the textbook thing. I'm not saying everyone, it's not black and white, but that's the trend. When you are a man and you are raised by an emotionally immature man, or a narcissistic man, or which is kind of similar, or your dad abandons you, you are now modeled what you should be. You don't know who you are. You're on this endless search to prove you're a man, because your example of what you should be was wrong. So it's kind of like you're trying to play a football game and you're a wide receiver, but you keep trying to play running back. Like you don't know what you are. And so you have this, if a man has not healed from their childhood, you can likely have a man that is constantly trying to be someone that he doesn't even want to be, and is just led, and it's just this constant cycle. So your aim is off, your trajectory's off. And what I had to do is I had to not just heal, but I had to relearn what is a man, and then work on trying to become that. And that's really difficult when you don't have a good example. But I think it's probably even harder for somebody who had the wrong example. I actually think I'm kind of lucky that I had no example. My aim was never aimed at the wrong person. It wasn't like I was modeled and following this bad example. I just had no example. So I was constantly like, my radar was like always searching for the right example. So that would hurt me in that way. But I almost think I could have been worse off if I was modeled this wrong example and I actually thought it was the right one. That's so detrimental to you as a human being, to be living a life and then halfway through find out your model, the person that you were following the whole time, was leading you the wrong way.
Right. And I think that's a little bit of almost the definition of generational trauma, where let's say you have a dad who's physically present but emotionally unavailable. You learn that that is normal, that becomes your standard. And then you become a dad and you think that being emotionally unavailable for your wife and your kids is okay. And the same pattern repeats. And that wound just gets passed down to the next generation. So I think one of the things that you said was fathers that are emotionally immature can create father wounds. Do you have examples of what that might look like?
Yeah. So yeah, I have to kind of define emotional maturity.
Yeah, I think that's a
Emotional
good place to start.
maturity is learning how to handle all your emotions in your body and tolerate those of others. So if you don't have the emotional maturity to handle all your own emotions, and you're a father, when a kid triggers an emotion that is uncomfortable in your body, you might lash out and blame them. So if your kid makes you frustrated, now it's their fault. Show me a child that's not frustrating as hell. Like kids are don't if you don't want to ever get frustrated, don't have kids. Like that's not the move. They're going to frustrate you. They're going to be like, "Daddy, daddy, daddy." And then think about this one, like, why? 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 Or like mimicking you or in the backseat of the car, you're just trying to have a conversation with your wife and they're yelling at, like, how many times have we gotten our conversations interrupted, or they just want to watch TV all the time. Like there's so many things that a kid can do that can dysregulate you.
Or they're whining about something for hours on end, whatever it is.
Yeah, so if you have kids and you're not emotionally mature, there is hope. You can mature. Call someone that can help you start to go through the process of maturing, because what I learned was that why in the world did I think I would be a good dad and a good husband without the example of a good dad or a good husband? Like, why did I think it was innate in me? Because my intentions were good? Well, I know a lot of people with good intentions that end up doing a lot of bad things. You have to learn how to be a good dad, how to be a good husband, and how to be a good human being, a good friend. Like you have to learn these skills. And I had to learn them. And it was humbling and it sucks to admit, but I'm here preaching that that it's worth it to learn them. Put yourself into a class, put yourself into a course. There are many. There's not just one. And don't think you can do it in a month. Don't think you can take a 3-month class and learn it. I would venture to say, and our mentors would say, it's a 3-year process to change your brain. It takes 3 years to really change your brain. And even more than that, if you want to go
can make
deeper.
little bits of progress before the 3-year mark, but
Yeah.
to truly turn things around, it's 3 years.
Yeah. So what does an emotionally immature dad look like? Overreactive, always triggered, always on eggshells. If you were on eggshells around your dad growing up, and then you are wounded.
That wasn't a healthy, safe environment.
Yeah, it's not healthy. Now, I'm not saying you have to heal. I'm not saying you have to heal. No one has to heal. But if you don't want to repeat the pattern, if you're wondering why you are the way you are, look back at your environment and see how it shaped you. You are the way you are. You respond immaturely to these events because that's the example you had, or you can't handle the emotions in your body because you weren't taught to handle them. The father is the first one that you meet. You meet him. You don't know him innately. Yes, you did come from his sperm, but it's less connected. And so you meet him, and it's this outside figure out of the womb that you meet and accepts you. And so when you get rejected by that father, it's like the world rejects you. When you get rejected by the mother, it's like part of me rejects me. Like that's a big wound as well. But the father is like the world rejects you. So you just lack this security. There's just something about the masculine energy validating you. A lot of times it can be reversed. Like women can be the masculine one, men can be the feminine one in the home. I'm just speaking to the men being masculine and women being feminine, but I believe it could be either way. But it all kind of makes up this balance, and every home is different, and you just have to explore. You have to explore your path. I think a lot of us are really scared to look back and go, what did I not receive?
Or I think, because I can speak to my own blocks, it was I didn't want to say anything bad about my parents, even in my own heart, let alone out loud. It was like a loyalty that I had to them that was like, I had great parents. They loved me so well. They did everything for me. And so I wouldn't allow myself to go, oh, but they also made mistakes. Oh, they're also imperfect. Oh, they're also human. Like I wouldn't even go there because I felt like it was betraying them to go there. But in not seeing your parents as human and not looking honestly at your past, then you can't really find your wounds and you can't heal and I wasn't really being honest about parts of myself. So learning that I could hold it in both hands, I can have amazing, loving, wonderful parents and they can be humans who made mistakes. And I also have some childhood wounds. Like for me, I had to learn that like those can both exist and it's safe to be honest about everything that happened to me in my life.
Yeah, and not all trauma, like a lot of trauma is unintentional or just from the world. Like a lot of your biggest trauma has nothing to do with anything that your parents chose. Like it just freak accident, you know? Like is that okay to describe it that way?
Yeah.
Like unintentional, just hard, and that's just our world. So I think we're failing ourselves when we're not willing to look at our own wounds. And for whatever reason, men have a really hard time validating their own wounds.
I think that there's this mindset of like, I'm a man and I'm tough. I'm not wounded. And if I was wounded, like, check out the limp I'm walking with. Like, it's like, look at my battle scars and not in a way of like honoring that they were hurt, but more like, look, I'm tough. It didn't affect me.
Yeah,
Is that
that's
right or is
very
that
true.
wrong?
No, that's such a good point, and I think that there's space for that. Like you can hold that on both sides because it's like our greatest gift as a man is to be able to compartmentalize and move forward. And I mean, you just look at the things men are into, like sports and the like war, these like warrior mentality. Like I'm going to get banged up and I'm going to wear it like a badge of honor to accomplish this goal. And that is the agenda. I did that in the yard all summer long. I was patting myself on the back and just feeling so in my masculine energy by being able to be in the dirt, digging roots and building things and creating things. I mean that's kind of the masculine energy, is to create that thing and go through the war to get to the other side. But we are also feminine. Men are also feminine. Like we have it in us, and we are all masculine and feminine. And I don't know, maybe I'm going to lose people with that, but it's a tug and a push and a pull. It's a yin and a yang. That it's these two energies inside of us, and if you're all yang and no yin, you might find yourself really out of balance at some point. And if your full agenda is to just dismiss every wound you've ever been through and never look back and just go full steam ahead, I would say that any man that's full steam ahead, never looking back, never validating, never healing, is probably risking a midlife crisis at some point. And here's the kicker. Maybe you can do it. Maybe you can go full steam ahead and you can ignore your feelings and you can just go full on and never look at your own childhood or your own wounds, and you will be fine. But I promise you, you will be disconnected from your family and from your kids, especially if you have daughters, because they don't work like that. And they even young boys, like they need validation. They need to be validated in their experience and in their emotions. Our emotions are our experience, and when you are full steam ahead ignoring your feelings, you're probably going to ignore the feelings of everyone around you. And they're not here just to meet your goals. They love that you're driven. Your family loves that you're driven. Your family loves you, provide. I know that. But a woman doesn't just want a provider. A woman wants to connect with her husband as well and emotionally connect. And when you're so driven and you're just trying to accomplish all these goals and you're never looking back and you're never validating your own experience, you're going to have a hard time validating anyone else's. And you're going to feel alone and disconnected. Because the emotional connection, when people said emotional connection when I was younger, I thought it was like face-to-face time. Like I thought it was like, I remember this video of this guy one time saying like, you marriages need face-to-face time. Like women need face-to-face time, like to sit down and talk about their day. I'm like, that's not emotional connection. A man could sit down and talk about his day with his wife and not emotionally connect at all. Emotional connection is when you say, man, the kids were really hard today and this happened and it actually hurt me. Like one of the kids said this and it hurt me, and you have an experience and you have a feeling, an emotion, and then I validate that experience and I say, wow, and I sit there with you in that. I don't try to fix it. I don't say, well, they're kids. What do you expect? Like I could sit there and have face-to-face time with you for 10 minutes and never emotionally connect to you at all. I could completely miss you and we can walk away totally disconnected. We could spend hours together and be emotionally disconnected. We have to validate each other's experience. And this is what most men are missing. How do you validate someone else's experience when you're not even validating your own? Stop invalidating your experience. Go back and look at it. You don't have to sit in it forever. You don't have to become some kind of sappy dude that never gets anything done and never works out or goes through any pain. Be the freaking warrior. Go and do that. But do the work to validate your own experience so that you can validate your kids' experience, your wife's experience, and you can connect to them. I promise you, you'll be a way better warrior.
Do you feel like your father wound affected your ability to be present?
Yeah, because it just made me really anxious. Like I was really insecure if I was enough as a man. Like if I didn't know where I was at, like in the pecking order, or like I was always worried about that.
Is the pecking order, do you mean like man enough pecking order?
Yeah, kind of. Like there is, for the record, there is none. Like there is no pecking order. Like your job is to just be the best version of you. And if you're competing with everyone else, you're losing, because you're always going to be able to point out somebody better, faster, stronger than you at something. Even if you're the best athlete in the world, I promise you there's some cup stacker out there that could beat you at cup stacking. Like you can always look at somebody and go, they're better than me at something, if you go into their arena, or you're the best athlete in the world and then you go to a concert and this guy's just ripping on the guitar and you're not a musician and your wife's like goo and gagaing over this guy ripping the guitar, you might feel insecure and jealous. You have to deal with that emotion and realize there is no pecking order. Your job is to be you. And if your wife is in love with you, you got to trust that she's in love with you. And if you're out there trying to be the best at everything because you're afraid she's going to leave you or fall in love with somebody else, you're losing the battle in here. You're losing it. You're losing the point. So like it hurt me to be able to be present because I was constantly on the lookout for where am I at? Where, like, am I secure? Am I safe? Where do I stand amongst these other men? Anytime there's another man in the room, unless he was a good friend that I had welcomed into like my inner circle, I was like kind of, comparing myself in some way. All subconsciously.
Yeah,
not
this
even
is
on a
not
conscious
something
level.
that a few years ago you would even know to say
I
that you
didn't even know
did.
I was doing it.
Yeah.
I didn't even know I was insecure. If you asked me if I was insecure, I'd be like, no way. I'm good at these things. I have my ego kind of to like fall back on. And it wasn't until I started doing this work to realize, oh, shoot, I'm actually really insecure. And when I go into a room with other men, I'm not connecting to I'm not connecting to you. I'm not connecting to these people. I'm kind of judging myself. And you can watch it on other men too. You see them kind of look around and start to like, you pick up on the energies when you start to notice this stuff. And it's not wrong. You're not wrong for doing that. It's just where you're at. Healing is not about becoming this better version all the time. It's about accepting yourself where you're at. And then in the process of acceptance, you actually do become the better version because you start to heal those wounds.
Right. Which, like, funny little plug, but that is literally why we named the podcast All of You.
Yeah.
Because it's about accepting
All the parts of
all
yourself.
parts of yourself, even the ones that you're like, oh, I do that. Like, that's embarrassing. I don't want to admit that, even to myself. But it's in that acceptance is so powerful. And I think just to kind of rattle off on that a little bit, I've watched you accept that you had a father wound and accept many different ways that that was impacting you. And you've grown tremendously from when we first started dating in being able to accept this and work on the ways that it was kind of coming out sideways out of you.
Yeah, well, you pointed out to me you not purposefully triggered a lot of insecurities in me.
Mm-hmm.
Because until you, like, I would have often not given my MO in a relationship was to not give my heart away, like to hold the upper hand. And not to get too far into that, like we can do another episode on that, but like the power and control dynamic, whoever cares less in a relationship typically will hold the upper hand because they don't care as much. So it's like, fine, leave.
Well, there's like
I'm
also
fine.
this like subconscious when you care more, you're like, and you can tell they care less, you're like subconsciously trying to hold on to them more.
Yeah, and any relationship that's playing that dynamic, you're in a power and control dynamic, which isn't love. You can't have control and love at the same time.
Right.
I don't have control of you. I'm married to you. It's no secret. You own my life. If you could wreck me emotionally, financially, you have access to everything in my life. You can wreck me from the inside out. I let you fully in to it. If you marry someone and you haven't fully let them in, you're kind of like playing a weird game, you know? And I've done it. I was married and I didn't know how to trust someone. And so you triggered a lot of this in me that realized like, oh shoot, like the only way to really get what I want, which is a healthy relationship, is to fully let you in on all my life. And when I started to let you in, you pointed out some flaws. And you pointed out like, why do you think like that? Like what you would literally be sitting there and you're like, that's not the Dave that I know. Like that I would have a stream of consciousness, like a sentence, and then like somewhere in that sentence there'd be a weird little core belief that popped out that showed my insecurity and be like, what was that? And then I'd be like, what are you talking about? Like that's just normal. Like everybody thinks like that. And you're like, no, not you should look at that one.
We
And
had
then,
many fights on like me trying to say something was not normal and you trying to tell me it was normal.
oh, that was such a
I'd be like, no, it's not normal.
yeah,
but
that
when
was
you
such a
don't know
dynamic.
different, you don't know different.
Yeah. Yeah, you really don't. And you start to and what happened at first was when you would point out those wounds, I would get really freaked out and I'd blame you or I'd blame shift. I didn't want to look at them. And because like, it's so weird. It's so weird how you do this, but your body, when you have trauma or pain deep down, like a father wound. So, like, let me give an example. Like, so because my dad left when I was young, I had an abandonment, a wound. And I would get anxious sometimes. And if you didn't text me back or like something seemed off, I would find a way in my brain to not trust you. And then I would question you and I would like kind of accuse you and sometimes even or get frustrated. I wasn't comfortable with the feeling in my body, you know? And so if I was anxious about you, and I never thought you were cheating on me. I never thought that like anything like that, but really deep down, I just wasn't comfortable with the feeling in my body. And you'll see this play out in relationships. Like somebody's phone dies, and I mean, you've done this to me. Like this is a normal relationship thing where not normal, but common. Somebody's phone dies and one of the person gets really anxious. They might think the partner's cheating. They might think the partner died. It doesn't really matter what they think. What matters is you're not comfortable in your own body in that moment. You have some kind of trauma trigger thing that's going on, and you can't stop the overthinking. The the emotion, the feeling has triggered thoughts, and these thoughts start to run wild. And then by the time that you call me back, I'm so worked up that now I'm triggered and I'm blowing up on you or I'm accusing you or I'm not in reality, right? And this all stemmed from my abandonment wound from my dad. It also stemmed from times because my parents were divorced and I had a single parent home and my mom worked 2 jobs. A lot of times I was home late at night. And there was years where like it would be late at night and my mom was at a church event or at a second job at work, which is not her. She had to provide for the family. Like, I'm not blaming my mom. God bless my mom for going to church and for providing for us. But my experience, my wound was sitting there at 9 o'clock and not being able to get a hold of my mom because cell phones weren't a thing yet. And I don't know if my mom's coming home and I'm 11. I don't know, maybe 12. Who knows? Like there was a large gap there of a lot of years where this was the case. And if I started playing into this thought pattern, I'd get so worked up in my body and so anxious. Sometimes I'd call a friend. I'd call a friend's parent to come get me. Sometimes I just didn't call anyone and I went and got in bed and I was just scared alone, but like clenching, like in pain. And so my experience was several years of different nights of the week or whatever, like this would happen to me and I'd just be in pain for like maybe 5 minutes. Then my mom would walk through the door, maybe 2 hours. It just, the thought, I couldn't stop the thought. And this pain and this pattern started creating itself. So then when I started dating you and you didn't text me back and I wasn't like, I don't want to paint the picture I was some kind of psycho, but I'm being honest about this because I think people struggle with this today. And your job is to calm yourself down. Is your phone allowed to die? Yes. Are you allowed to be gone and not text me back? Yes. Okay. So my job is to take care of me no matter what. And even if something bad happened to you, like I still have to regulate me and not do damage to the relationship. Because if your phone died and you call me an hour late, my job is to show up well and forgive you for that circumstance and not blame my feelings and emotions on you. When I start to blame you for my emotions that are triggered by my past trauma, I'm now having an overreaction to you and I'm now blaming you for how I feel in my body. And this is so common. and these wounds are real. And we, as children who are left by our dads, are harmed in some way by just the sheer life experience, are blaming our partners for our feelings and emotions, and we have to heal.
It's heavy. Thank you for sharing that.
It shows up.
Oh, yeah, it shows up. Yeah.
And it's hard to admit it.
Well, I think it's this. It's hard to admit it. But if you had not have admitted it, I would not be here. We would not be in a relationship.
No.
Because your wounds were showing up in ways that were negatively impacting me, and I wasn't going to tolerate it. And it took time for you to heal them, but I was willing to stay by your side because I saw you putting in the effort and the time and the work to heal them, and I saw you changing, but it was hard in the beginning.
Well, and let's be honest, you weren't willing to stay by my side in the beginning when I wasn't putting in the work yet.
No, we broke up.
When I was drinking, I mean, I remember being with you and being triggered and just telling you, I want to go get drunk. Like, I remember like us sitting like at OB Noodle, and I ordered a shot and a beer, and that was kind of my MO back in the day, a shot and a beer. And you were like, oh, like,
that's the night we're having?
Yeah. And I was like, yep. And like, and probably sake too. Like, I was like, yeah, I actually want to get drunk right now because I don't like the feelings in my body. And I was aware enough in that moment, because I had started doing some work, I think, where I was aware enough to know that I was running from my feelings, and I still wanted to run from my feelings. They were that bad. They were that hard to hold. I mean, they are I'm not saying it's any, my feelings are still just as strong as they ever were. My wounds are still just as painful. They still hurt the same amount. I'm just stronger. My pain tolerance is higher now. That's all that's happened. It's like when I was a child trying to help my mom with groceries. The groceries were so heavy. The groceries never changed the weight. Like they've never gotten lighter, but I've grown up to be stronger to hold them. That's what it's like. It's just that I've gotten stronger in my emotional capacity to handle the feelings in my body. And we have these grown men who are 6 foot whatever, and 300 pounds, or we have whatever your height and weight are, it doesn't matter. You have these grown men. You could be as muscular and tough looking as possible and grow a full beard, and you have never been taught how to grow your emotional strength, your emotional capacity. And when you grow your emotional capacity, you can sit with a baby screaming. You can sit with a child who's irrational and out of her mind in emotions. You can handle your daughter who's going through her period for the first time and handling those emotions. You have emotional capacity to handle the emotions of yourself and others around you. This is why I'm passionate now about coaching, and especially coaching men, because I've not just developed enough strength to hold my own emotions, but I have some capacity to hold space for others. And if I can hold enough space for men to help them, they can dump it on me so that they could start to hold capacity. Then they can start holding capacity for their families. And that's the route that I just believe is so fruitful.
Yeah, my mind, when you say that, goes to this story that when we were on our honeymoon, you were like, oh, you have to read this. You're reading a book by Richard Rohr, Wild Man to Wise Man, I want to say it was. And there was this story in the book, full disclosure, I haven't read the whole book, but I did read this passage about this nun who was out of prison, and she brought Mother's Day cards for the inmates to be able to write for their moms. And she ran out so quickly, she had to go and get more. And because they all wanted a card for their mom. So when Father's Day rolled around, she went and made sure she got just as many cards. And when she showed up to pass them out at prison, no one took any cards. And I think there's just something to be said for the father wound that, yes, the mother wound
She said she couldn't even give away a card.
Yeah, she
There
couldn't
wasn't
give
a
away a
single
card.
man in the prison that wanted a card. And that's when she realized that every single man in that prison was there because they didn't have a good dad.
There's shades of gray in wounds and hurt and psychologically what can happen to people. But I think without a shadow of a doubt, the father wound is a known massively negative impact on our society and for families and homes. And it's actually why I'm so proud of you and excited for you to do this work, because healthy men in a home, healthy present husbands, healthy present fathers matter. Just matters.
Yeah. It does.
Thank you for being so open and sharing quite a bit on this episode.
Yeah. I don't like have any feelings of that it's hard to share. I just believe that it's possible to heal, and I want to help others heal. And if I can in any way support that initiative and be a part of that movement of men healing their shame, healing their wounds, validating their experience so that they can validate. I mean, women are craving men who can validate their experience.
Oh, if a man can validate a woman's experience, he can have any woman he wants.
Yeah, and I think that that's all they're looking for.
Maybe not all. We like a few other things too, but it's a big one.
Yeah, relationships are complex and wants and needs and all that, but I definitely think that that's what's missing in a lot of marriages, because men will do it in the beginning. They'll validate the experience, and then it gets old. It gets harder and harder as time goes on because they aren't validating their own, so they can't validate those around them. Your validation comes from inside, and I think that you can heal on your own, but I think that men facilitating each other's healing is powerful, and I think that we need each other, and I think that it's helpful to have another man look at you and validate your experience. Nothing's changed my life more than one single thing that my mentor coach at the time told me. And I was upset. I was triggered over something you did. And I was so frustrated with you. I think I was even contemplating ending our relationship at the time. And I was just triggered. I was just hurt and triggered. And he looked at me in all my pettiness and all my insecurity, in the midst of my just I was a 5-year-old. I was acting like a 5-year-old. And he looked at me and said, so another man, a grown man, looked at me and said, it's okay to be you. I totally get why you would feel that way, and validated my experience. And the emotion that came out of my body, the emotion that he released, was incredible. It was like Niagara Falls, in front of like 10 or 12 other men, grown men. And I don't know why I had this. It was like I had this emotional block that I'd been holding in for over 30 years of no other man really sees me, no other man really sees my experience. Like no one could really validate my experience. And this mentor of mine, knowing me and having learned about me, was able to sit there with it and not say you're being petty, not say you're being immature, not be mean, not be cruel, but just validate, I get why this is hard for you. And then on the other side of that, do you want to choose this behavior though? Do you want to choose, like, you have you are now a grown man, you know, not emotionally, but you are 30 something years old and you love this woman. Is this how you want to show up? And I was then able to choose the right reaction because I was first validated in my experience. And just this men facilitating other men's healing and being able to sit and validate your experience, be like, of course you are the way you are, but you have the right to choose now how you want to show up, and let's work through that together. And you have a partner in it, you know, was game changer for me, changed my life. That one statement, I'll never forget. I could feel it now, what it felt like when he said it. It's okay to be you. And I get why you would feel that way. Like, men just don't say that to each other. Men ignore it, they invalidate, they say you're being immature. Like, men don't like other men being emotional. And so they invalidate it. And it's just, we're not handling it right. You know? Yeah, it's huge. It's life changing.
Yeah.
Life changing stuff for sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, love you.
Love you too.
Bye.
Bye.